Have you ever felt like life was crushing you? Have you ever gone through a serious time where it was nothing short of a crisis? I mean, a major setback where one thing was piled on top of the other. First, you had physical problems and then financial problems. And before you recovered from the first thing, it was like another thing knocked you down. When that happens, it can feel like the weight of the world is pressing on you. It's crushing on you. And you may have felt a bit like this, just crushed. And in those moments, what do? How are you to respond? And if you're anything like me, you have more questions than answers. I recently went through one of these experiences. I'm still going through it. I'm on the recovery side now, but I'm still recovering from one of these life-altering, monumental, crushing type of experiences. And this has been the most difficult thing our family has ever faced. And I want to share with you some important insights that I believe will help you. Situations like these can cause us to act irrationally and make things worse, to waste time pondering things that don't matter or will not help, or the worst scenario, to lose our faith entirely. And this is why this video is so important if you are or have faced some tough times. Before I get into what has helped me, I want to explain a little bit about what has happened in my own life. A few months ago, I went on a business trip, and as I was coming home from that trip, I noticed that a number of things physically began to rapidly change. And as I got home, I got very, very ill. Basically, I watched all of my physical systems shut down one by one by one. And things rapidly declined for me, so much so that before I knew it, I was in bed and not able to control my body. And my husband had to step in to care for me. So to even go to the bathroom required assistance. I had to have him bathe me and feed me. All my systems, everything shut down. And we were just really confused. There was just so much going on my body that it was a bit scary on that end, to just not have answers, not quite know what to do. And I was so bad off that I wasn't able to direct my care, which is a normal part of my life. I help others heal emotionally, physically, and spiritually. I know quite a bit about the physical body and how it runs. Normally, I'm very, very healthy. I don't even get significant colds in the year, so this was weird. This was really, really weird. And there was a number of other things happening at the same time that were just not right. And so this was a major, major problem, and it basically stopped everything in our house to the place of now everybody's worried about me and taking care of me and making sure I'm okay. And so what this meant was then my husband Eli is not able to work. He's staying home, making sure that I'm okay, taking care of me. Everything was a hot mess. And so what happened was physically, I shut down. Then my husband's health starts experiencing problems because he's taking care of me. And of course, at the same time, both of our financial streams completely shut down because neither one of us are working as we're focused on our health. And so this was a huge, huge problem that ricocheted across our life. It was just a mess. It's just a mess. And we're still in recovery mode. We're still not where we want to be. Even shooting this video today is going to take up much of my energy stores. And so it's just been an interesting time as we slowly have begun to recover our health and do normal life. Life was not normal for quite some time, and it wasn't a brief time. It wasn't like 1 or 2 weeks. This basically shut down our house for 6 entire weeks before we were able to start turning a corner. And so this has been something we've never experienced before. This has been the most devastating and catastrophic event in our family. We are very thankful for many things, such as we're recovering, we're okay. It's nothing that is fatal. Nothing fatal has happened here. It's everything we can recover from, and we know that financially we will recover as well. But this has been a very, very serious problem where it's been, again, one problem after the other, after the other, after the other. As we went through this process, we noticed that we had a lot of the same questions and concerns that I've heard from so many of our other friends that have gone through hard times like this. Like when you have a very serious situation, it's just one on top of the other on top of the other. Because we're human, we have the same kinds of questions. God, where are you? What is the purpose of this suffering? Is God allowing this trial to happen? Or is this the enemy trying to crush us? Is this a spiritual attack? Am I supposed to be learning something here? Is there a lesson that I'm supposed to be learning while I go through this? And then you have questions like, did I do something wrong? Am I doing something wrong? Am I not praying correctly? Did I do something right to bring on this attack? Right? There's all of these questions. And to be honest, most of these questions, they're not great questions. But what is important is who I am during times like this. Who will I be? How will I show up in the midst of an experience that is so extreme that it feels like it's crushing the life out of us? And as my husband and I prayed over this, we kept coming back to something very significant in the book of Job. Now, I feel like these takeaways are really big and they may not be what you think they're going to be. So I'm going to ask you to stick with me. And in case you're not familiar with Job, well, first of all, it's spelled like Job, J-O-B, but not pronounced the same. It's pronounced Job. Yep, if you Google Job, you're going to find all kinds of employment information, but that's not what we're looking for today. We're looking for the book of Job. Quite a big book. I do encourage you to read it. Fascinating and amazing things hidden in this book. But in case you're not familiar with the story of Job, let me explain just a little bit. And actually, it's easiest if I read just a little portion of it to you. Let's start with verse 13. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And verse 22, in all this Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. If you take a little study of Job, you will see that he is described as a righteous man and clearly a very rich man from this description. And one after the other, all on the same day, a number of calamities fall. So he's losing servants, he's losing cattle, he's losing his possessions. They get wiped out. And then his 12 sons and daughters are killed in this accident. It's a very, very rough time. But it doesn't even stop there. This is just the beginning of his troubles. Then, again, take a look at it. I'm not going to go into, you could do a sermon series on Job, okay? So much to unpack here. But verse 7 says, so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. So Job broke out in boils. So some versions say boils and others say sores, but these were boils, which are absolutely disgusting, which are sores that have pus on them. And then Job used pottery, broke it up, and scraped these pus-filled boils clean, which is absolutely disgusting. As I say it in my mouth, like I'm cringing just thinking about it. It's really gross. The point is, this was a very, very physical, so on top of everything that happened, losing everything, losing his children, he's got to be laid out in grief from this situation, and then his health suffers a huge calamity as well. And so you can see when you go through this, like, and if you read, like, we're just getting started, okay? But the setup here of how tough this was, how extreme this was. When you and I are going through a tough time, we will often think of Job. Like, people will say, I've heard so many of my friends say, man, I just feel like I'm going through a Job level kind of distress, right? I'm just feeling so like, this is unbelievable. Like, this is so much at once. It feels like I'm going through a Job experience. And of course, sometimes we're a little reluctant to say that because most of us have not lost 12 children at once. Like, this is a huge, like, really comparatively, my suffering in these last few months is small in comparison to what Job experienced, okay? But still, nonetheless, we relate to the suffering that Job went through. And so when we go through an extreme time, we will think of Job. So there's the setup for everything that has happened to him. And then the real trouble begins to brew. In chapter 2, verse 9, his wife says to him, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." And of course, Job responds to her, "But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. And I want to make sure I bring that out, because this is, his wife speaks first and basically says, man, Job, if all of this is happening to you, how can God possibly be for you? And I think this is a real temptation that we face. Even our well-meaning friends ask questions like this, right? They come to us and are like, well, what use is believing in God if all of this is falling on you? And so there's a certain part of curse God, turn from God, and just go on with your life already. And so we need to be aware of that Job's wife even said that to him, was like, curse God and die. And so to be aware of that, like, that can be a normal part of your emotion that comes up. And then if you have any friends that will exacerbate that, right, that'll draw that out, it can be even harder for you. And then you can have even well-meaning friends that ask questions like, do you have some unconfessed sin? Which is such a great question, right? Such a great question. But sometimes this happens too. And that's exactly what happened to Job as his friends came to him. Part of the counsel that he received, and it goes on for chapters and chapters and chapters, as Job's friend expel all their hot air and pontificate about what has happened to Job. I mean, chapters and chapters of chapters of Job's friends trying to, quote, console him, trying to answer all those questions that we have. Why this? Why that? Why has God allowed it? And in the end, they wasted a whole lot of time and sounded like complete fools. And then God shows up to speak to Job. And this is where the power really comes in. And this is Job 38. And if you don't read anything else, skip to Job 38 and hear what God has to say to Job. And I'm just going to read a small portion of this. Verse 4. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? It goes on. It's so powerful here. But basically, first of all, God says to Job, stand here a minute. I got something to say to you. And then he says, where were you when I? Where were you when I formed the earth? Where were you when I gave Adam his first breath? Where were you where I told the oceans to come this far and no further? Those are the types of questions that God asked Job. And out of that conversation, Job repents. He's like, God, you are sovereign. You are in control. I am not in control. You are, and my apologies. And what is so interesting to me about this is before all of this even happened, I heard this question from God during a time of worship. And I immediately knew it was this passage. I heard God say, where were you when I? And my only response was simply to honor God and to bow before him in worship. But it didn't really make sense because I wasn't going through a calamity at that time. Like there was nothing significant going on, but again, I knew the passage. And so that happened again in an intimate time of worship before all of this. And then as we're going through this, and my husband and I are praying and seeking God and really just looking to God for, help, right? Crying out to God in this time. My husband Eli says to me, I keep coming back to the part in Job where God says, where were you when I formed the earth? And where were you when I created all of this? So for myself and our family, we don't know what happened here. I don't know why it happened. And I'm not totally sure how this will turn out or when I will be fully recovered. But what I do know is that God is sovereign. God is still in control, and the word of God is still true. So I cling to the promise of Romans 8:28, which says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. We misquote this verse all the time, but basically it says all things are working out to our good if we love God, right? For those who love God, all things are working out to our good. And so I cling to that promise. I know that there is a purpose on this, even a purpose in all of this, even if I don't understand it. I know that every promise God has made to me is still good and true because I am a child of God. And my only responsibility is to walk in obedience and to give God glory. And so in the midst of this storm, we kept affirming to each other, my husband and I, God is sovereign and I am not done yet. God is sovereign and I am not done yet. And how can I say that with such certainty? First, I've made up my mind. I am not done yet. And yes, we do have a choice in these matters. You have seen people that have come down with something and they've given up too early and they gave up the fight. I could do that. I could have done that. I could have chosen that. And I'm like, I am not done yet. And the second thing is I hold to the things that I know God has spoken. God speaks to us primarily through his word. And so first I go there to his word to see his promises. But God also speaks to us personally. He's spoken personally to me and to our family. And truthfully, we are just getting started. And in that certainty, I look to God. And here's the part I want to be sure you do not miss. Anxiety and fear and depression comes from uncertainty. It comes from speculation. It comes from wondering. It comes from all the questions. Because when we're stuck in that mode, we're focusing on the wrong things. We're focusing on the lie of the enemy. Where certainty comes from is focusing on the truth. I'm going to get a little further into this in just a minute. But when we focus on the truth, that's where our certainty comes from. That's where our peace comes from. That's when we're relaxed and we're like, it's all okay. As challenging as the situation has been for us, I am so thankful for the muscle that I've built. My peace throughout all of this has not wavered. And if you're going through a situation like this and your peace is hanging by a thin thread, it's okay. I'm fortunate to have eliminated anxiety and depression from my life. And because this is my topic and what I teach, even a trial like this has not shaken me emotionally. And that is possible for you too. And if you want to get started on that journey, the best option I have for you right now is my book, which is in the description below. But I want to continue to unpack some insights for you right now. Notice that when you go through a situation like this, your natural go-to is probably going to be to magnify the problem and the circumstances. And this is unfortunately what we teach each other. We ask each other about the problems and the circumstances, and we tend to focus on that. And when we do that, it makes us more worried and more upset. We often will respond to the situation with what-if questions that end badly. What if I get worse and die? What if financially we never recover and we lose our house, right? We ask these what-if questions that are not good questions to ask. And all of this just makes the situation worse, waste our time, and just leaves us all in knots and an anxious mess. But on the other hand, we can use our muscle and focus on the truth. We can focus on the truth of God's word. We can focus on his promises. Those promises that say God will never leave us nor forsake us, that God's children do not beg for bread, that if God is for me, then who can be against me, right? There's all of these promises that we can say yes and amen to. And when we focus and magnify God for who he is, that God is sovereign and God is control, then all these circumstances and all these problems, they just fade. They just fade. The other part that I encourage you to focus on is the prophetic words that you have received. I think the hardest part of this for me has simply been a bit of a letdown. At the beginning of the year, my word was breakaway. And so there was definitely times as I'm laying on ice packs trying to recover, I'm like, God, this is not what we talked about. We talked about breakaway, which is not spelled like setback. That's a different word. I mean, who picks setback for their word for the year, right? That is not what I wanted. And so as I was regaining strength and simply trying to figure out how to make myself food and answer my own messages, I was kind of arguing with God about this. Like, this is not what we talked about. And it reminds me of one of my favorite verses, which is found in Habakkuk. I know, Habakkuk, you're probably wondering where that is even in the Bible, and it's right before you get to the New Testament. Let's take a look. Write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it, for the vision is yet for an appointed time. But at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. And I had to read it to you in the New King James because just some versions sound better in the Old King James and the New King James Version because they use words like tarries. What does that mean? Well, let me help you out here. So if you read another version, you'll see it. It looks like this. It says, "For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end." Okay, it's coming. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. And so you see this, the vision is coming. Though it tarries, it will not tarry. It feels like it's taking forever to get here, but it's going to arrive. God says it's still on the way. Like, I know it's taking some time. I know you're impatient for it to come, but it is still on the way. And it's interesting, when you study the book of Habakkuk, which rhymes, you will find that Habakkuk is a prophet who is arguing with God. He does not understand why God is doing what he's doing. He does not think that God is delivering justice. And God answers Habakkuk in the same way that he answers Job. I am God. I am sovereign. So interesting. It's so interesting. And so one of my encouragements to you is to look again at the promises of God that are in the Bible, but also those promises that have been given specifically to you. Like, there's been some specific revelations that God has given to our family that we know we are not done yet. We are not there yet. And even though this feels like a setback, God has a purpose and a plan, and we will continue to serve him and move forward. And at the end of the day, I do not need to understand, and I don't get to. And you may have to reconcile with that truth. If you feel like life is crushing you, you may never receive the answer as to why. Deuteronomy 29:29 says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God." Like, there are just some secret things, there are just some mysteries. It is enough for us to know that God is still in control. I think it is quite possible that if you are in one of those seasons where things are really crushing you, just coming to that place in your prayer of, God, I give it to you, I surrender, I know that you are in control, and I know that you are sovereign, really will help things to begin to shift the right direction. If you need some help regaining peace in your life, whether that's from an extreme situation like we've been talking about today, or life in general, be sure to check out the links in the description below. And if you've had a bit of frustration by the delay from that promise that God has given you to actually seeing it fulfilled, then be sure to check out this video right here. Thanks for hanging out with me today and for your prayers as I continue to recover. I look forward to being back with you again very soon. I keep adding my own sound effect where I could probably do that in post. Why is there 17 minutes of mommy crushing an earplug?
5.